Greetings, folks. Welcome to another episode of Campfire Stories. Gino here, your tour guide into the strange, the unknown, the terrifying. Tonight, I submit another story to the Grimm Society. The Hidden Garden. Blessing or curse? Could you tell the difference? I remember when I was a kid, I loved going to my grandfather's house and working on his garden with him. It was like a mini Garden of Eden. He had fruit trees, chili pepper bushes, and rows of beautiful flowers. Every visit, I would run out to the garden and either water or pull weeds and spend time with my grandfather. One day he left me out by myself, just as Dog and I were sitting on this log he had out, way in the back next to some plum trees. I was relaxing, enjoying the fruits of our labor. I glanced over to a corner of the garden I never noticed before that day. Being a curious kid, I made my way over to explore. I saw a small metal gate covered with vines and flowers. I began to uncover the gate. I wondered where this secret gate led to. Finally, I found the gate's latch and gave it a push. It was very rusty, so I had to give it a really good hard shove. Behind this gate was a portion of the yard I had no idea existed. It had a few dried out pomegranate trees, and the rest was dry patches of grass and dirt. There were piles of stones in various places that looked purposefully piled in those places. It was a very strange looking place compared to the rest of the beautiful garden. I noticed my grandfather's dog didn't want to follow me in there. I called for her, and she just stayed outside the gate. She whined at me, nervously pacing back and forth. Then she just tilted her head back and ran in the opposite direction. I figured she heard my grandfather, so I turned to get out of there too. I was sure this area wasn't meant for anyone to find, so I got out of there as soon as I thought my grandpa was coming. All day I couldn't stop thinking of that secret garden. Why was it hidden? What was with the rocks? Should I ask Grandpa? A few weeks went by, and I forgot all about that secret gate. My next visit to my grandfather's house, I got bad news. His dog had died. He had said that he thinks the neighbor kids did something to her. He wasn't sure if they sprayed something in her eye or gouged it out, but he said that he had found her laying by the fence by the neighbor's yard, and that the kids next door were cruel and they would tease her often. When he found her, she was dead and her eye had been gouged out. I naturally was terribly upset and I cried all day. She was my friend. I asked my grandfather what he did with her, and he told me not to worry. She was in a good place. I was spending the night that weekend, and it was such a sad time. The house, it just seemed so empty without her. That evening was so strange. I went to go sit out on the porch with my grandfather. He seemed very sad too. That evening, the fog was rolling in heavy. We've had fog once in a while, but that evening and night, the fog was so dense you could barely see in front of you. We talked for a while and made our way inside when it got too foggy. It was bedtime, so I went to bed and took a peek outside to see if the fog lifted. But it only got denser. I was only asleep for a few hours when I heard a sound that woke me up. It started out as a howl, then whining. It sounded like my grandfather's dog. I thought I was dreaming, then I heard it again. I was sure it was her. I got out of bed and listened for it again, and sure enough, I heard her barking. I made my way to the window. I couldn't see anything but fog, so I put on my shoes. I thought maybe she didn't die. Maybe Grandpa was wrong. So I went out to see where the sound was coming from. I thought if I could find her, it would just make my grandfather so happy again. So I went outside, I picked up a lantern my grandfather kept out on the porch, and I went out into the yard. The air was so wet and cold, and the fog, it made this once beautiful garden look terrifying. The light from the lantern cast shadows of things that didn't seem to be there during the daylight. Her bark got louder and louder.
I assumed I was getting closer to her. I tried to call out to her, but not yell, just a loud whisper. "Ginger, come! Where are you? Ginger!" Soon I could hear her all around me, like an echo, all around me. It was sounds of her panting and barking and then whining. As I made my way all the way to the back corner of the yard where that secret gate was, everything went quiet. All I heard was the wind start blowing through the trees. I moved the vines once again away from that gate, and I looked over. And as clear as day, I could see her. She was running around and playing like a puppy. I was shocked at seeing her. I called for her, but that moment she heard me, she looked at me and ran in the opposite direction. She ran right into this block wall that bordered the garden and vanished. I was scared and confused. I didn't know what to do, so I went back to the house. My grandfather, he was going to have some explaining to do in the morning. I had a restless night of sleep. When the sun finally came up, my grandfather was already up and about, making the house smell of coffee and bacon. He called me to breakfast. He could tell something was on my mind, so he asked me what was wrong. I told him what happened the night before. He stayed quiet. When I was done telling him everything, he just said, "That's strange," and got up to clear the dishes. Then he looked back over his shoulder and told me not to go to that part of the yard again. Curious, I asked him why, and what was back there. He just told me I wouldn't understand, and it's not for me anyway, so stay out. This whole incident made me very curious and very uneasy. A couple of weeks went by, and another visit to Grandpa's house came around. I tried to pretend I forgot about the secret gate and the whole incident with the dog. I waited for an opportunity when my grandfather was busy and not directly around. Then I made my way back to that area behind the gate. There was something mysterious about it. When I got to the secret gate, I saw that it was open. I quietly slipped into the secret garden. When I did, I noticed my uncle was in there. I tried to stay very quiet. What was he doing? I stayed hidden, watching him. He was digging a hole. Next to him, he had a small box. I watched him as he buried this small box and then piled rocks over the spot. I heard him chant something. I couldn't understand it. It was in some strange language. When he finished, he grabbed his shovel and turned to exit the garden. I quickly made my way back to the house, hoping he didn't see me. What did he bury? My mind was going crazy with questions. I just had to know what this secret place was. That night, I was woken up once again. This time, it was to the sound of my name being called. I didn't even take the time to put my shoes on, and I already had a feeling I knew where the sound was coming from. I quietly slipped out of the house. The wind began picking up. It was whipping around, gusting harder and harder the closer I got to the hidden gate. Everything went quiet. Then I heard my name again, then a loud scream. Startled, I looked all around me. Something flew out of the old plum tree. I ducked down, and when I looked back up, I could see something was perched on the gate. It was my uncle's parrot, but it couldn't be. My uncle had told me that his parrot had died about a week ago, but it's not like there's a lot of parrots flying around this area. And when I looked closer, I saw his little bracelet that my uncle had special for him. He loved that bird. When I got closer, he flew off into the area behind the gate. He flew like a beautiful young bird, in circles, squawking and whistling. And right below him, I saw Ginger running and jumping and playing like a puppy. The fog started rolling in, and I saw this black cat emerge and hop on top of a pile of rocks, and he started meowing. Was that midnight? There was no way. That couldn't be him. Was it? Midnight died months ago. I called to him, and when he noticed me, he came running to me. But how? I was scared, confused, and in utter awe. What was going on? All the commotion was almost magical until I heard a moan. The moan was coming from the far corner of this site. It sounded like it was coming from a very large pile of rocks. The moan sounded like a woman. It got louder and louder until it was all around me. I ran for the house. My grandfather woke up because he heard me slam the door open and then slam it closed. Panicked, I tried telling him everything I saw and heard, but he just shook his head as if he already knew what I was going to say. He scolded me, telling me he knew I wouldn't understand. I begged him to help me understand, just to explain it to me. What did I just experience? He sighed and said, "Well, I guess you're old enough. And I'd have to know sooner or later." He began to tell me that before my grandmother passed away, she would have him helping her in the garden, which she loved with all of her heart. The day before she passed, she took him out back to the secret gate. She told him this piece of land had been in her family for generations, and it was very special. Grandpa told me that he wasn't entirely sure if the land was blessed or cursed, but it definitely wasn't normal. He said that if you bury things with love in your heart there, they occasionally come back to visit you. He went on to say that the days and the frequency of the visits vary. He shrugged his shoulders, and he told me that he didn't really even understand. I looked at him like he lost his mind. It just couldn't be real. But I knew what I saw. Who was the woman I heard? What else was buried there? Was my grandfather losing his mind? Was I losing my mind? This all raised more questions than answers. I started to get this feeling. I started to feel bad for all of those trapped souls there. I tried to convince my grandfather that this was wrong. He said he knew I wouldn't understand. He told me to be ready tonight at midnight. He wanted to show me something. Midnight came around. He grabbed his lantern and told me to follow him. We made our way to the hidden gate. He cleared away the vines and moved aside to let me in. He took me to the spot in the garden where the large pile of rocks was. He looked at me with a strange glimmer in his eye. A smile of such joy brightened his face. It was a look I had not seen in a very long time. He whispered to me, "Take a look." And he moved a tree branch out of the way a bit so I could see past it. My eyes opened wide and my jaw dropped. I could feel a lump in my throat. I couldn't even speak at this point. My grandfather leaned in and whispered in my ear with a chuckle in his voice, "Now do you understand?" Hey folks, thanks for listening to the end. If you liked the story, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to join the Grimm Society, hit that subscribe button. If you have any stories to share,